the beauty of the film, I think, which was going to be one of my questions, and now that we're talking about it, Morgan Freeman's narration, like that literally carried the film, the pacing of it in such a beautiful way that I'm not saying that it wouldn't have worked had that not been there, but I truly feel that really carried the film in a very deep way.
Yeah, and it was a deliberate thing. A lot of times now films, they use that technique as a band-aid, but that was written into the script. It was not an afterthought. In actual fact, we recorded Morgan reading that, all the narration. Because I said to the producer, I really need it in the cutting room while I'm cutting.
Sure.
Because I've got to pace things, pace dialogue.
Yeah.
But there wasn't much there. They went to the radio station and recorded it. And Morgan did it just in one go. And it was so good, without seeing a frame of picture, it was so good that we used it in the film.
Actually, I talked to one of a fellow Sydney person 2 days ago, John Seal.
Oh yeah, I know John very well.
Yeah, we had a great conversation about English Patient, and I just remembered you when we were talking, and it was good to have someone talk to in Australia again.
Yeah, I've worked a lot with John. I mean, we came up through the ABC in Sydney together, working on drama. And then when we both went freelance, he before me, we ended up working together on features in Australia and in the US. So
You guys did work on a feature in Hollywood together?
Well, we worked on I don't know if you want to, a couple actually, one, The Perfect Storm, and the first Harry Potter. Well, that was in London, but it was a Hollywood movie. Yeah.
Oh, fantastic! I didn't put the two together. That's good to know. That's good to know.
Yeah.
Oh, fantastic. Well, today we're going to talk about the Shawshank Redemption and the Green Mile. Both based on novels, both directed by the same director, and one I think received a lot more critical acclaim because it came after Shawshank Redemption, because Shawshank didn't really do well at the theaters, but it became a classic since then. Tell me about Shawshank, and how did you get on board on that film? Had you worked with Frank Darabont before?
No, I hadn't, and he'd only done one film before that, which was actually I think it was a TV movie, The Woman in the Room. That was
okay.
Anyway, I just got sent the script as what normally happens. They send out the script to a whole lot of people, a whole lot of editors, a whole lot of DPs, and then they interview. I interviewed for it. I got on very well with the producer, Nikki Marvin, during the interview, because it was Frank and her. And we discovered that we had a very similar road to our career. She at the BBC, me at the ABC in Sydney. I did a lot of documentary work, she did. So we kind of hit it off. She was kind of instrumental in making the decision, or encouraging Frank to make the decision. So she told me to choose me. So I just read the script, and the story about that was I was working on a film at the time I got the script, and I was working 7 days a week, long hours. I couldn't find time to actually read a script. So I asked my wife to read it, and came home one night and said, "Have you started that script?" She said, "Yeah, I have. I don't know about it. It's about guys in prison." Anyway, the next day I came home, she said, "Forget everything I said. You've got to find time to read this script." So I managed to squeak it in here and there. And I thought, this is the best script I've ever read. And I wanted to do it. And fortunately, I got chosen to do it. Very fortunate. I mean, it's so much of it is luck, you know, like if I hadn't have got on very well with the producer, would I have got the film? I don't know.
Mm.
You know, it's lots of people were vying for it.
Yeah. No, it is definitely one of those things. You mentioned, you're working 7 days a week at the time. This was like mid-90s.
Yeah.
How, I mean, I know it's obviously something that, people in art, we love doing what we do in film, but still 7 days a week. I mean, there's always like a breaking point.
Oh, yeah.
How long did you go for working 7 days a week? Like, what's the longest stretch you've gone?
I think the longest stretch I've ever done that has been like 6 months.
Whoa.
But that it's never out of choice from the editorial department. It usually happens in post-production. Once they've finished shooting, they may have run over with the shoot, but the release date does not move. So you have to work and
Yeah.
you just got to work, you know. And sometimes they decide they want to do some reshooting because the ending doesn't work, or they've still got to do that in the same time. And so it just requires, I mean, I'm okay doing 7 days a week. What I can't do is all-nighters. I just can't do that. Some people can. I mean, for a while. I would rather, I mean, I was actually working on Sliver when I
Right.
got the script. And that was a very difficult post-production because there was a reshoot in there. And I remember trying to do a change that the director had asked me to do, and it was about 11 o'clock at night. And I was just like not functioning. And I said, look, he wanted me to stay and do it. And I said, I'm all over. I'm thumbs and fingers, thumbs and I don't know what it is, but all thumbs. And I can't really get my head around this change. I said, I'll go home, I'll have a good night's sleep, I'll get in early and I'll do it. And I did. I got in early and I did it within a couple of minutes. It was done. Whereas a lot of other people will just push themselves through, and it's just, I can't do that. But
No.
7 days a week I can do, and I have done many times, like a lot of people in my position, usually for the same reason, that the release date is not movable. It's written in stone, planned years in advance. So
Yeah. Yeah, no, that makes sense. And how big is your editorial team? How big was your editorial team at the time, aside from assistant editor?
in those days, those days, because we were still cutting on film. In those days, depending on the film, on Shawshank, it was just me, my assistant, and an apprentice. So 3 of us. The apprentice would do everything from filing trims, reconstituting the footage, to getting coffee and lunches and things and running errands. But I have had crews much, much, much bigger than that, like 3 or 4 assistants, a visual effects editor. When we first started cutting on digital, we used to have, because you had to conform the work picture to match the digital edit, you needed basically two teams. One was a film team and one was the digital team. So those crews got quite big. I think on Harry Potter, we had something like 11 people in editorial. It got big.
Yeah, no, I bet. And with the Shawshank, it's a long film, even by those days standards, especially by nowadays standards, to have that long of a film. But it didn't feel obviously that long at the time, when people watch it. But did your post-production process start after, or was it simultaneous? Or
I'm always working alongside I'm just a day or two
Right.
behind the production. Yeah, always. I think most editors work that way. I suppose only people who don't are directors who edit their own films, like James Cameron. I suppose he doesn't He
Yeah.
may come in on weekends and do when he's not shooting, but I don't know how he works. But it's always you've got to. I think it means that you're going to have at the end of the shoot, you're only going to be a few days behind having something for the director to look at.
Yeah.
In a rough form before we fine tune it. But yeah, I'm always cutting along with the shoot.
Yeah. And with Shawshank, was it any time when was there a scene that pushed you guys a little bit behind because of any technical or story-edited challenge? If there's some example that you may remember, I would love to hear it.
Well, the very opening of the film was not the way it was supposed. It ended up the way it was not meant to be. It was meant to be two discrete scenes: the flashback scene of the murder,
Yeah.
and then the courtroom scene. They didn't manage to finish shooting all the inserts they needed to complete the murder scene, and we were going to always plan to, because that very much film stayed on schedule during the shoot, which is unusual, but it was low budget. They had no choice, so they just said, right, we'll do that later in post, which they quite often do, inserts and things later with a very small crew, manageable. And during our first, after I'd showed my first cut of the film, we start from the beginning. Frank and I, we sit down and we'd go through each scene and we'd talk about changes that he wants to make and how it merged into the next scene. And it was obvious that it wasn't working, the two separate scenes. So he came up with an idea, or we came up with it together, I can't remember, of integrating the two scenes. And it just worked. It was like, you look at it now and you go, that was just the way it was meant to be. It was never meant to be. So when the prosecutor is talking in court about what happened, we're actually seeing it, or seeing suggestions of it, what we could cobble together from the two scenes. So the courtroom scene basically stayed the same, and we just picked points in his dialogue where we thought we could insert parts of the first scene to make, and it just streamlined the whole opening of the movie. But apart from that, everything else was, there weren't a lot of deletions to that film, but there was another incident where when the warden finally finds, this is a spoiler alert if anybody hasn't seen the movie, somebody out there hasn't seen it.
I'm sure there are lots of people who still haven't.
Yeah, probably young children who weren't alive. When the warden finally finds out that Andy has duped him, we used to go to a scene, I think it was of Red just laughing, I can't remember, in his cell. And then we would go to the police arriving. But then we just took out that laughing scene because although it was funny, it didn't move the story. And then it went straight from the warden seeing that his the shoes had been changed, I think it was, in the box. They weren't his shoes, they were dirty off. To him, he look on his face to the police cars arriving, scooting along the highway. And it just propelled the whole part of the movie. But, apart from other places, I can't think of any. There's actually a great little book that Frank put out about the whole screenplay, and he wrote notes on the side of it of what was happening during production. I forget the name of the book. It's a very small paperback, but it's like the shooting script of Shawshank.
Yeah, I think I have that actually.
Yeah, he describes all these things that I've forgotten. It's a while ago.
Yeah, I read it a long time ago.
It's a great idea to do.
Yeah. And Frank,
but you talk about it being a long film. That was the perception, but it was actually almost the same length as Forrest Gump. But no one complained about Forrest Gump, which I always thought at the time was I didn't call a bit hypocritical. There wasn't a lot of difference in the length of the film. We were
Yeah.
like 2 hours 20.
22
I mean,
minutes.
Yeah, 2 hours
No,
22.
believe me, for me, it wasn't long at all because, and Forrest Gump is also 2 hours and 22 minutes. I just
Yeah,
Googled it.
yeah,
Both films weren't long to me. What I was meant to say earlier was nowadays, the 2 hour, 7 minute mark is roughly the place where I think exhibitors, because of the runtime and to have multiple showings, additional showings,
Oh
that
yeah,
kicks,
yeah.
right?
There's that, very much that.
Yeah. But it didn't feel the beauty of the film, I think, which was going to be one of my questions, and now that we're talking about it, Morgan Freeman's narration, like that literally carried the film, the pacing of it in such a beautiful way that I'm not saying that it wouldn't have worked had that not been there, but I truly feel that really carried the film in a very deep way.
Yeah, and it was a deliberate thing. A lot of times now, films, they use that technique as a band-aid, but that was
Yeah.
written into the script. It was not an afterthought. In actual fact, we recorded Morgan reading that, all the narration. Because I said to the producer, I really need it in the cutting room while I'm cutting,
Sure.
because I've got to space dialogue to pop in around the narration, around the dialogue. And so she said, well, what we do? I said, can you record it? Just get him to record it and we can, redo it. Well, they went to a radio station because they were on set in Mansfield, Ohio, which is this tiny little town, industrial town that was very depressed after all the industry had moved out.
Yeah.
So there wasn't much there. They went to the radio station and recorded it. And Morgan did it just in one go. And it was so good, without seeing a frame of picture, it was so good that we used it in the film while we were in production and doing screenings. When we came to actually do the physical mix of the movie and we're in a proper sound facility, we found out that there was a technical problem with it all. It had a very high pitch whine that you couldn't hear normally until you get into one of these studios.
Yeah.
And we couldn't get rid of it, couldn't filter it out. We tried all sorts of things. So we had to get Morgan to redo it. So we redid it to picture using his old one as a guide for him. And we were trying to match the performance, and we did it, but it took us 5 times, 5 complete sessions with picking the best read of each one to get it to what it ended up being. But it took him 5 times. He had to come in 5 times and reread the whole thing. But it was used on the set a lot. They would play it on the set, and shots were timed to it. The one that's really springs to mind is on the tarring of the roof scene.
Yeah.
There's the great one at the end when it pans along all the men and it goes up to Morgan, and then it ends on Andy. That was all being played so they could move the camera and be at the right place at the right time. But all the others were just, the scene was cut, and the dialogue was fitted in between. So if I might have to put a longer pause in the dialogue than would be natural for a scene, so the dialogue wouldn't overlap the dialogue. The voiceover wouldn't overlap the dialogue.
Incredible.
That scene, particularly on the roof, was a combination of both those problems. It was there were 2 conversations going on. If you remember, there was a conversation going on with Andy and Hadley, the guard, about his money and his wife, and then there was a conversation going on with Red and the guys that had to intertwine, and you had to make sure that it felt logical enough to cut away from one conversation to another conversation and get back to the other conversation and not feel like we just held the scene still while the other part went on. It was a very, very tricky scene to do, but it worked.
And also I think I mean, Morgan Freeman probably would have found another way to do what he does now, narration. I mean, that sort of, I think, was the first time, or one of the first time he actually narrated. And now, I mean, he's done films
Now
like
now he's Mr. Narration. Yeah,
everywhere
very
now.
much. I know
I mean, that was a setting ground, basically.
it was. I don't think he'd done narration before
I
that.
don't think so either, because I think before that he had done Driving Miss Daisy
That's right.
and
Yeah.
Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves, and Glory. I think those were his three major films.
Yeah. So it's not like he was a household name by then either.
Yeah. No, no. Working with Frank Darabont, what was that like? Like the first time you said, it was his first major film coming from TV. How did you guys work together and his creative process? What was that like compared to, let's say, other directors?
Oh, look, I really always have liked working with the writer director, because there's only one vision. I mean, it was easy. It was a dream. It was like you didn't have to try and please the writer and the director, because it was the same person. He was great to work with. I mean, he was very, he wasn't precious about any of his dialogue, because you got to remember all this dialogue, even though it's from a novella, it's all Frank's dialogue. None of this appears in the book. The book is actually the short story. If you read it, I mean, I didn't read it till after the film because I didn't want to be kind of poisoned or influenced by it.
Yeah.
It's like, this is nothing like the film, because it's set over a longer period. It's got more wardens in it, about 5, I think, whereas this one has 1. So Frank was great about dropping dialogue out that he thought was superfluous, and there was never any kind of argument. It was just an easy. He and I sitting down in those days, sitting down at a Steenbeck, which is a flat. I don't know if you know, that's a flatbed editing machine.
Yeah.
And just working it day to day. And Frank was great because his writer, the way all writers work, or he did, he was a nighttime person and I was a daytime person. So he would come in late and leave early and give me time the next day to do the changes we talk about. Same thing happened on Green Mile. He'd do the same thing. It just was perfect because I didn't like working through the night. I'd do my changes in the morning, and then he'd come and look at them, and then we'd yes or no, or tweak that, and then we'd move on. So it was very easy. And what helped with both those scripts actually is they were just so well written. You didn't have problems like with a lot of films where scenes aren't working, and let's try moving this around to there and that around to there, or put it at the end of the film. The only real complication was the opening, as I've already talked about, which worked out brilliantly.
Right. And with the Shawshank Redemption, one of the things that people always remember it with, among many other things, is the conversation that happens in this semi-middle part of the film about hope, and then the finale, hope is not a good thing, it's the worst of things. Hope is a great thing, it's the best of things. And that ending, was that, in terms of the dialogue, was that always there in the script, in the way it was in the final film?
Yeah. I mean, before I came onto the project, the only thing is that the end of the film was a lot earlier. Was planned to be Hope, him driving away in the bus, and the bus is going away from camera, and I think the last words of his narration were, "Hope. I hope to see my friend. I hope. And that was the end. We always shot the end of the film where they meet on the beach, but it was much simplified. He walked up playing the harmonica, and because he never played the harmonica that he had in the cell.
Yeah. He
put it to his mouth and he never played it. So Frank had him play it, but it just seemed a bit hokey. So we dropped that part of the scene. They just walk up and see each other and hug, which was perfect. One of those things that by simplifying a scene that made it better than it was. But the end of the film, the last bit of dialogue was always, or voiceover was always that, the hope. I hope to see my friend. I hope.
The ending, the way you just described, I'm so glad that we got to see the way it's done now. I do love that shot on the beach with the boat, the water, them coming
was
together.
Such a contrast. I mean, I had a big. The only time I was really very forceful about an opinion. I mean, you always give your opinion, but you try to do it diplomatically with it. Frank and producer Nikki Marvin were in the cutting room talking about ending the film where they originally wanted to end. They both said, yes, it should end with the bus going away. And I went, you are nuts. I said, I think you'll have a riot in the theatre if you end the film there. And the studio also agreed with not that they were in agreement, I didn't know it, but they were in agreement with my side of the story. It was just the producer and the director, because they had collaborated so much on the screenplay for years that
they were too close to it.
They were. Unfortunately, we never previewed it like that. We never previewed it without the ending. So never got to see whether the audience would revolt, but having seen the way the audience reacted to it during the screening, they would have revolted because they were so into it. It was very rare to have a preview, a test screening where the audience are vocal about what's going on. Like they're so with the characters that they're like they're sitting in their living room, watching it. They were just not holding back about them. It was dynamic. It was even more surprising that the film didn't do as well in the theaters as it did at the preview. But I think that was a lot to do with the marketing of the film. It was just the studio didn't know. They should have known what they had because it scored very high score, like 96 or 98% or something.
That is high, yeah.
Yeah, really much higher. And but they didn't know how to market it. The name, I think the name should have just been as what everybody calls it now, just the one word, Shawshank. People would have understood that, but I think the word redemption trips a lot of people up.
Really? You think so?
Yeah, because what does it mean in the context of this other name, Shawshank? The original name was even worse, Rita Hayworth and Shawshank Redemption. That one was a real mouthful, but that was the novel or the short story, whatever.
Yeah, no, it's one heck of a film. It's funny. I recently like literally late last year, I finished a feature narrative documentary right here, this poster, Citizen of Moria. And it's about a filmmaker, Afghan filmmaker who leaves his family behind because, Taliban put him under threat, and he fleds to Europe, and he ends up in Europe's worst refugee detention center. So couple of things that I was trying to do, and actually in the first few cuts we had these 3 scenes in the first act, second act, and third act where he tries to relate his story to some of his favorite films. And one of them, there was a scene about a friendship in the film, and his friend and him kind of get separated. Not separated, they kind of, say goodbye to each other. And we brought the scene in of the friend at the end when Tim Robbins' character leaves and everything. And we had a scene from Inglourious Bastards and another movie, The Fault in Our Stars, and a brief clip from The Green Mile because there was a mouse character. We had all that done, and then we approached the studios for licensing. We found out the cost and we scrapped the whole thing. It it was like $4,000 for 5 seconds. It was
Oh,
it was absolutely ludicrous, and we didn't budget for that. That just something came in post. The reason I'm telling you this is because even though we didn't end up using it, those films had such an impact, not just on me and other filmmakers, but just society as whole, that how we relate to them in such a way, in a very personal manner.
uh, yeah, lots of people get a lot out of it. I am surprised how much, if you go onto YouTube and you look and you find that so many people see significant religious aspects of both those movies, Shawshank and Green Mile. And unless I wasn't in on the meeting where it was discussed, there was never any deliberate intention to make it that way, but people see in it very religious aspects. Certainly with Andy getting out of the pipe and in the rain and the mud and putting his hands out like that. But as far as I know, Frank never talked about that being a religious symbol. But I mean, the hope part and friendship, and I suppose you could read it. You could read anything into it. Just adding to your point that everybody gets something out of it.
Yeah. Well, I think it's when films like, Back to the Future, Jaws, Schindler's List, Jurassic Park, The Rock, Seven, all these films that are still remembered, like, obviously being timeless, people who really love them, and including myself, you'll watch these movies over and over again, and you'll think about them so much that you'll start creating your own you're using your own imagination to connect these things that are not even there. And I think that's where that the script, the performances, the direction, the editing, everything was in sync, and it clicked with people in a very deep personal manner.
No, I agree.
And that's what it is, honestly. Like I sometimes I overanalyze films too. I did that with you last time. Like I, looked into them so much that I will just overanalyze them because it becomes such a part of us.
Yeah, I mean, and that's fine, I suppose. If you get out of it is something you can relate to, and but it's still surprising, It's still surprising.
I thought, I've never seen religious symbolism in them, but there was one Frank Darabont film which I don't think you were on, that The Mist. That was all about religion. I don't know if you have seen that, with Stephen King's book, The Mist.
Oh, right. No,
Yeah.
I was in London then.
Yeah, that has ridiculous amount of religious symbolism that I saw, but I've never seen. Now that you mention it, now I'm going to be looking for it if I ever watch it again.
Yeah. Well, John Coffey, he's in Green Mile, his character, if you look at it, he was this kind of spiritual guy,
Yeah.
And but watching analysis of it, it's quite eye-opening to see what people see, and I was just looking at a completely different level, on the face value of it,
Yeah. Right. And speaking of Green Mile, was that like an automatic marriage after Shawshank Redemption?
Yes, it was. Yeah. Frank wanted me to do it, and it was a little tricky working out because I was so busy at the time. I was just in post-production on a film that kind of went under the radar with Anthony Hopkins and Cuba Gooding Jr. called Instinct.
I think I know about it. Yes.
And so I was kind of working on the tail of that, and then on the weekends going in on that film until they ended. So no, that was very much Frank wanting me to do it. He wanted me to do The Mist too, but I'd already committed to go to London to do Harry Potter, and I couldn't back out of it. So
Yeah. So the Green Mile, was it similar workflow, and was there any kind of challenges or difficulties that you face while editing, being on the set?
Well, no. I mean, fortunately, we were editing at the studio in Hollywood, in West Hollywood, which used to be called Warner Hollywood, and they were shooting on that stage right near my cutting room. So it was easy if I had a question. It's always great if you're close to them. And so much of that was interior sets. There was just there were very few exterior locations that were done. I forget where, Carolina or somewhere. So I'm just trying to think if there was anything tricky on that film. I mean, the length of it was
that was
like
a long film.
3 hours and 15 minutes or something.
Yeah.
But most people thought it was like 2 hours and 15 minutes.
Yeah.
That was such a tightly knit, well-written script that you couldn't just drop a scene out. If you dropped any scenes out, it didn't make any sense all of a sudden. Everything was so well, like the motivation of going from one scene to another was so strong and logical and obvious and necessary, because we were pressured by the studio to shorten it. And we actually said to them, look, give us your notes, tell us what you want us to drop. They couldn't, because they had the same problem we had. So they eventually bit the bullet and released it, and it didn't harm it at all. I mean, there was a lot. Some reviewers said it was long. It was, but so was Titanic. That was over 3 hours. So this whole thing of length, I always think, look, I've seen some terribly long 90-minute movies.
I was going to just say that.
If the story hasn't grabbed you, you should be transported and not even look at your watch, or need to look at your watch. The story should be that compelling. And I think The Green Mile was. The people who liked it, the ones that have spoken to me, have said they had, when I tell them, that film was over 3 hours long, they can't. They go, no, it wasn't. No. Mm-hmm. Really? Yeah, go and look it up on IMDb. You'll find out. But actually, there's a little on the wall here. Speaking of Green Mile, I don't know if you can see.
Yeah.
Frank Darabont, me, one of the producers, David Valdez, cinematographer, I forget his name, because this was a reshoot on the back lot of Warner Brothers. I was arriving to go to work on Perfect Storm, which was being shot there and cut there, and Frank was shooting the opening scene with the girls, the two dead girls. He was shooting it in an artificial lake location there, because I can't remember now if it was a reshoot or just never got shot in the first place. But no, that film, with that film, there was no real problem with juxtapositioning scenes or having to move scenes around.
Yeah.
It was just, that was just so well written.
And
great source material.
And that's what it is, right? Like, for example, I talk about this to a lot of people too. And, let's just take example. I was talking to Don Burgess, who's the cinematographer for a lot of Robert Zemeckis films.
Yeah.
And we did an episode already with him, and we just did another one with Contact. And that film was 2 hours and 30 minutes long, right? I never felt anything with that. So I convinced my kids, 11 and 13, that we got to see Contact. And they asked me, how old is it? The kids nowadays, the first question they ask is, how old is it? I said 1997. I'm like, just give it a shot. They started watching it. We paused it, I think, at around 15-minute mark for just a washroom break. They were so hooked, they couldn't even feel that it was 2.5 hours long. And that's what it is, because the character has to draw you in first with the story, and everything else has to sink in, and you don't feel anything. And yes, you're right. I've seen sitcom episodes 22 minutes long that feel like they will never end.
Right. And I don't know. I haven't worked in the business for 5 years, so I can imagine it's still pretty much the same way. Somebody at the studio somebody in power has a fixation with the length of the movie,
Yeah.
and that they want you to take out a couple of minutes, and they go, okay, so you take it out, and they go, well, what did that do for the movie? Well, it's still a bit long. Let's take out another 10 minutes. What do we? It's like you're making something. I don't know, something that it can be just chopped up, but it
Yeah.
still goes on. And I've been fortunate to experience, or unfortunate to experience, both sides of that.
Well, I ran into both problems, short and long. One of the film that I was talking to you about, it's 75 minutes long. So it got into several festivals, and a couple of major ones turned them down. And then later I found out is because festival films normally when they take it are supposed to be 90 minutes and above. And I'm like, I'm not gonna make my film long just because it has to be taken to festivals. And then the other film was 81-minute long, and I was pushed, by some investors, bring it down to 60 minutes. I'm like, that's like losing 20% of the film almost. Like you're gonna lose it.
I've
And
seen films get ruined. I've
I
seen
do,
films
and
ruined because of that.
I,
Yeah.
stuck with my guns. But had the film probably done better? Maybe, sure. But at the same time, the story is so much better with the time it has because that's what people are engaged in. Like, if you just tell them half a story or the character development is not there, it's not going to work.
Right. Then if they're not invested, because you haven't spent the time to invest, then they're wondering, well, why do I care about this character? And that's when the film starts to drag. So
Yeah.
it's like shooting yourself in the foot. Yes, you made the film to a set time, but nobody engages with the characters because you chopped out all that development footage of the characters. I worked on Mosquito Coast, the Harrison Ford film, Peter Weir film.
Right,
Um,
right.
I just worked on the middle section of the film. Um, I was about to go off to America to do Witches of Eastwick for George Miller, and
Hmm.
Peter Weir asked me to come in and help out. So I just helped out for about a month or so. And when I left the film, I thought it was pretty good. And then I was in Los Angeles, and I was invited a few months and months later, invited to the premiere of the film. When I went to see it, I couldn't recognize it as the same film. All of a sudden, the film starts, and straight away, Harrison Ford is this crazy guy. And you go, what? They cut out all the development stuff of how he got to be this way. So you're just watching this guy go crazy all the way through the film. You don't understand why. I couldn't believe
No
it. And it came,
context.
no
No
context. And
context.
it,
Yeah.
yeah, and it came down to I don't know who it was, but somebody made the decision to chop all that stuff out, probably for time. And it didn't serve the film. I was surprised.
That happened recently. When I say recently, I think in the last 5, 6 years. Ridley's, there's a lot of alien films that have come out, Prometheus and
Yeah.
Alien Covenant and a bunch of others. One of those films, I don't remember which one it was. There was a scene that Ridley cut out that what I don't think it was in the theatrical version. I could be wrong. So they released it on the web. It was like basically the intro to all the characters, sitting in a round table discussion on a spaceship, which was about 9, 10 minutes long, and they gave the audience a flavor online first that these are the people's
Ah,
lives that you're going to see, and it wasn't in the theatrical version.
that
And
was clever.
it was, but the problem is people who didn't see the version on the web before, they probably, but at the same time, I think there's a fan base for alien films, so I'm guessing majority of the people did see it. But yeah, you have to have that context, even if it's a 5, 10 minutes. People relate to that stuff. People love that stuff.
Yeah, they do. Anyway,
Yeah. So Green Mile, going back to that, that film did critically and I think box office wise much better than Shawshank.
It did.
Yeah. Um, when the screenings of that film happened, the test screenings and whatnot, how was the reaction if you were to compare it to Shawshank? Like, what was the audience going through at the time, if you remember?
Well, yeah, they weren't. They were engrossed in it because it's the kind of film that just sucks you in, and you'll. Whereas Shawshank is more emotional in a lot of ways. I mean, there's a lot of emotion in Green Mile too, but the I don't know. We did preview Green Mile a few more times than we did Shawshank, I think, and therefore, yeah, the audience. I don't think they reacted so viscerally to it, but they didn't. Interestingly enough, the issue of length, I don't ever remember it coming up at a Green Mile screening. People
That's
just
so
did not.
fascinating.
They just thought it was about maybe 2.5 hours long, but they were out by 45 minutes. Huge chunk, because it was so gripping. You know, it was one scene after another, you know, of just great dialogue and great acting and just great story. A unique story. I mean, pretty unique
It was.
film.
My wife watched it recently. She had never seen it before, and she saw Shawshank before Green Mile, and she's like, "How the hell did I miss this film?" As we were watching it, and she said once something which I never thought of. I'm like, okay, that does make sense. Both Shawshank and Green Mile have a lot of kind of like it has a Broadway feel because you know the theater, like dialogue and conversations and lines and she really dug into them, both of them, especially Green Mile. I dug more into Shawshank than Green Mile, but she dug way more into Green Mile than Shawshank.
Yeah, because they're both well, similar subject matter. They're both in prisons. They're both
Yeah,
roughly the same time. So that the dialogue, the style of talking in those days was fairly similar. Um, there was no it's no snappy dialogue like or slang like there is today. You know, it was all very. And then they were innocent times in a lot of ways.
yeah. You know, you mentioned snappy dialogue. Whenever I'm watching a film and there's that 2 word, 3 word that drop in for no necessity, just to have, you know, something people to react, it just ruins this. Like especially in a serious film, like just to have that in there, it just takes me right out of the film. Even an action film, I find it takes me right out.
Yeah, I mean, a film's got to suck you in, and if something throws you out, it takes a while for you to be pulled back in. You know, it has to be a good film.
Yeah. And one thing I wanted to, I think I may have talked about this before, but obviously it has to do with the director and writer. You know, we talked about The Rock, Michael Bay, completely different film than Seven, David Fincher. Then you have Shawshank and Green Mile, Frank Darabont. Completely different pacing, completely different scripts, completely different story. Is it easy to transition from those type of films from one to another, or is it easy because the scripts are different and they're good?
Yeah, if the scripts are good, it all comes down to the script. Starts with the script, ends with the script. But also, I don't find it difficult at all because if you pay attention as you're moving along, like an action scene, you cut it a different way. It's not, you don't cut a dialogue scene like
Yeah.
an action scene. Although I've seen a lot of dialogue scenes cut like they are action scenes, I don't comprehend it at all. But I think you just got to pay attention and let the footage talk to you. In other words, pay attention to, like, if a director's used a big long tracking shot and he's also done close-ups, well, the close-ups are probably just for safety. The tracking shot's been done for a reason. Don't cut it up.
Yeah.
Use it. Like, I don't know. It's reading the material. And I don't mean literally reading. I mean like reading the room. Like you pay attention to what's going on, and you can tell. The pacing should be set harder in action, because action scenes in the rough form can look boring and unexciting until you add some sound effects. But just with dialogue scenes, you pay attention, to the script, to the way it's been shot. Don't force a style on it, is what I'm saying. It should come with it. It should come with that.
Did you ever feel, again, I mean, you answered the question, but when there's, like, for example, a comedy film that needs to be edited, a director would prefer somebody who has comedy experience, right? A director who would expect somebody who has action sequence, drama, horror, suspense, all those genres. Does that somehow did it ever become intimidating for you in the early part of the career or mid part, that you haven't done this genre? And, like, was that ever a case at all?
Well, it wasn't, because you have to have faith that you can do it. And
you do, but the directors I'm talking about.
Yeah, the director. Well, I was fortunate, because when I started in Australia, and there wasn't a lot of choice. I mean, from the director's point of view, there wasn't a lot of it wasn't a huge, selection of people doing editing. And so it was basically like, oh, you're an editor, so you can do it. And then you just learnt how to do it. Like, I learned a lot about, action working with George Miller, who had, worked and learned a lot of stuff on the first Mad Max film by doing a lot of the editing himself. And so you give him something and he gives you something, and then you've done the film, and then all of a sudden you've got that credential. He can do action. You're only going to do one, and then you do a drama film. It's hard. You've got to convince the people you can do it, and the only way to do that is to do it. I mean, if they don't like what you're doing, they can't get rid of you, and they do.
Yeah.
So, I think a lot of, if you fail, you fail, and therefore you don't have a career. So you've got to just, man up, and hopefully by doing it, you will prove to yourself you can do it, and more importantly, prove to the director that you can do it, just by showing you that you've done it. If you cut a scene and show it to a director who doesn't like it, he's going to tell you he doesn't like it, or we've got to fix it. And if you can't fix it, then they bring someone else in who can either fix it, or then they find out that it's inherently in the material that it wasn't shot properly.
Have you been ever brought onto a film where somebody was let go?
Yeah.
Which film was that? I don't need to know the name of the editor, but which film was it?
Well, let me think. There's been a few. Just trying to think of one that. Well, I was brought on to. I suppose the one I was brought on to that was the biggest name director was a TV movie that I did straight after. I did it straight after Harry Potter, which was for John Frankenheimer. It was his last film. It was an HBO film called The Path to War, which was about the Johnson era, President Johnson's last term of office and the Vietnam War and why he got out. And he didn't like what the editor had done to it, so he brought me on, and I finished. They were still shooting at that time, and I went all the way through to the end. There've been others. I mean, I don't want to really go into it because there's a lot of them. But yeah, it happens a lot. Most editors have had it done to them, and and they've been brought on to do it to other editors. So it's a really tricky area. It's like sometimes you can be seen as one of those editors. You'll go and recut someone else's stuff, and then it's silly because it's part. Everyone's got to make a living. It's like you're asked to fix something, and you look at it and you think, yes, I think I can fix that. They don't just give it to you. It's rare that they just give it to you and say fix it. They interview you. They ask you. They show you the film what it is like at the moment, and give you the option of whether you think you can fix it. You don't really know until you get into all the material. That's the problem. Sometimes you can look at it and go, well, I've got to be able to do it better than this. This seems to be unnecessarily awkward or overcut. A lot of the times it's overcut, too many cuts.
Yeah. No, I agree with that. And I think it's a big problem even now, like, with whether it's mainstream or independent filmmakers. And just I always find filmmakers who are from other parts of the world, like whether it's Asia or Africa and all that stuff, not all, but just the way of storytelling over there is still, in most cases, still the old way, especially if you go to Iran or people from Afghanistan and stuff. They just like to keep the shot in one frame and tell the story as less shots as possible. And I find that very, very appealing and very, very interesting, and it's something that's missing in Hollywood now, very much so. I find maybe there is a turnaround coming. I'm not sure, but I really hope there is, because I genuinely miss those films.
Yeah. Comes back to the script. If the script's good, you don't need to cut it up. Force a style onto something. You don't need to do that.
I would recommend you watch this film. It's a Persian film. It's directed by, I think he was nominated for a few films. His name is Majidi. It's called Color of Paradise. It's a beautiful film. Yeah, I can guarantee, and it's really well put together too.
I'll look it up.
Yeah, it's a beautiful film. But thank you so much, Richard. Appreciate your time as always.
My pleasure.
And hopefully, if I can see something else that we wanted to have you on, I would definitely reach out to you.
Will do. Good.
Thank you so much, Richard. Enjoy your day.
You too. Bye.
Bye-bye.